Thank you for still being there on ESPS Sunrise FM 96.1. It is our second edition of our discussion segment this morning on ESPS Sunrise FM 96.1, and it is the Spotlight. Our guest on the Spotlight is the Executive Director, Society for the Improvement of Rural People, and a former Head of Service in Ogun State, Dr. Chris Ugu. Doc, it's been a while. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Ida.
Thank you for being with us. Like I told you earlier on, our conversation is still on the approved new minimum wage. Yes, we had a discussion around it earlier, but right now we will look at the issues, if there are any. And right away we are setting the phone lines open so that you can join the conversation by calling us on 0907 275 9950. 0907 275 9950. Dr. Wu, the latest agitation for the upward review of the national minimum wage is not a new one to you. You've been in the civil service and got to the REM highest echelon of civil service. What was it like during your day?
Thank you very much, because the reality is that the history of minimum wage in Nigeria dates back to 1981. 1981, the national minimum wage was 125 naira. Then in 1989 and 90, we now had 250 naira. In 1998 to 99, we had 3,000. In 2000, we now had for state workers 5,500, and for the federal workers 7,500. Then in 2011, we now had 18,000. Then 2019, we now had 30,000 naira as minimum wage. And today, we're now 2024, we're now talking about 70,000 naira. So you can see there has been a review, as it were, of the minimum wage. And it's because of a couple of challenges or parameters, as it were. Number one is the issue of the inflation rate. As the inflation rises, it becomes very needful for government to review what they pay to staff members. When we talk about, it's not just about the civil servants, it's also about the organized private sectors. They also review their own in line with these inflationary trends that is so prevalent in our global system now. Nigeria not exclusive.
All right, during your day, did we have what we are currently experiencing? To and fro, jaw, and even at some point a war between the leaders of the day and the organized labor in achieving the upward review? Because you just cited that due to inflationary conditions, that there was the need in the past to increase the take home of the minimum take home of an average worker. But then when it gets to the point, it becomes a tug of war. I don't know if it was like that way back.
But incidentally, there happened to be one person that was part of the negotiation of the 30,000 naira.
2019 increase?
Yes. And we didn't have this kind of going forward and backwards. I mean, everybody understood there was the need to increase it. But what was the contention at the time was, how much are we going to accept? Keep in mind also that during that time, we didn't have all this fuel removal, petroleum removal and all that. So life was, as it were, a little step, and there was this mutual understanding between the powers that be, that's the government, and the labor. So we didn't have all this kind of altercations and going forward and backwards.
So what do you think is the reason behind the long sit down, the long negotiations that have happened?
Well, it's sort of, for me, well, that's my point of view. You know, I'm not saying it to, that's what, but from my own perspective, I think it's when people don't have no sense of empathy, they don't put themselves in the shoes of other people, they don't really realize what the average person is going through. I mean, how can you imagine a situation where our legislators at the national level are provided with vehicles costing millions and millions of naira, but just to give a pittance, as it were, to the workers, it becomes a Herculean task. For me, that's lack of empathy and lack of understanding of what people are going through. And then lo and behold, you had this instantaneous announcement that fuel subsidy has been removed. And of course, we do know that the fulcrum around which every economic decisions are taken, or even at the family level, is revolving around transportation. And so as soon as that was done, of course, people took advantage of it, and price of goods and services began to skyrocket. So if we now look at a situation where somebody is giving 30,000 naira at the end of every month, tell me for heaven's sake what he's going to do with it in terms of his rent, in terms of the school fees of children, even food, which is the basic minimum need of average human being. I mean, all this is in jeopardy. So you can now understand why the labor, as it were, was very uncomfortable, and of course that led to what we now describe as going forward.
All right, finally, after the back and forth that we went, we at some point were even on strike, so it's been a long time coming. Finally, the NLC, the TUC, and the federal government were able to agree on a wage, 70,000 naira. Do you think that will solve anything, or is there something they need to put in place so that the 70,000 naira can mean something?
Of course, I trust and believe, like the president did mention when he was talking about that in addition to this 70,000 naira minimum wage, there are going to be policies that's going to be put in place to cushion, as it were, the challenges that are likely going to be a fallout of this 70,000 naira. In other words, the president understands that this 70,000 naira, much as people can say it's okay, the reality on the ground is that there are certain policies of government that need to be put in place to ameliorate the challenges that is going. Number one, according to him, is the issue of the CNG, compressed national gas. This CNG the intention is for them to convert vehicles that are running on petrol, if you like, to now put a technology in place that will now be using gas. Of course, people don't realize that Nigeria is a very massive gas production country, even vis-a-vis even petrol. So if we're able to put in place a technology that will convert most of the vehicles that are running on petroleum to gas, it will help to bring down the cost of living and cost of transportation as a consequence. I don't know, we also heard about how Dangote is now beginning to say that he's being undermined, that which is oil company, that ideally the cost of petroleum and even gas will come down. But according to him, he's being sabotaged by sources he didn't want to make. But the reality on the ground is that fingers are being pointed at this importation of fuel. In fact, according to him, our petroleum is compromised, as it were, because the methane content of the petrol they bring to us here in Nigeria is terribly on the disturbing side. So these are the challenges. So I think the president is thinking about these issues, and if he's able to put those things in, transportation costs is reduced to the barest minimum, I think the 70,000 naira, but for me it's still work in progress.
In the past, if wages are increased for government workers, does it have an adverse effect on the economy of the entire populace? Because during the agitation, we heard stuff like if we increase to what Labour is actually agitating for, which at the time was 250,000 naira, we will have some issues. Were there issues in the past so that we can actually analyze as
the reality on the ground, there are indices that are put into place before we begin to talk about wage increase. There is the issue of the ability to pay principles. The reality is that even when that 30,000 naira was eventually becomes a legislative issue, it becomes an enactment, how many states actually were paying that 30,000? So you find a situation where the state governments find it difficult, after paying other administrative costs and all that, find it difficult to pay staff workers this minimum 30,000 naira. So you now begin to think, even now that we are now, we have accepted 70,000 naira, you are still going to have this challenge and lacuna that most states may still not be able to. But we thank God for our state, that of the states that have accepted to pay, Enugu State happen to be one of them. Others are Nasarawa, Akwa Ibom. They have accepted to pay the 70,000 when eventually the National Assembly passes it into law. But there are other states that have already expressed that they may not be able to pay it. Those include Abia, Rivers, Delta, Imo, Kano. And sad to say that some of these states are oil producing states that have extra money that is given to them because they are oil producing. And yet they are saying they will not be able to pay 70,000.
For a state like Abia State, do you think that one of the reasons why the governor is saying he will not be able to pay is because he's using the bulk of the money to take care of the infrastructural decays that has happened there over the years?
Yeah, that could be a justification. But I'm only saying that these are the challenges and issues that may come out as a fallout of the 70,000 naira minimum wage. Because, like you just mentioned earlier, I mean, there are so terrible decays, that emanated from the administration of the previous administration in the state. And so Governor Oti is trying to see how he can, restore or resuscitate what was a dilapidated economic situation in Nigeria State. So these are challenges. But we cannot just because we want to reactivate some of the moribund industries and all that and infrastructure, they're at the expense of the welfare of the workers and people.
All right.
Okay, once again, Chom, I don't know if you have continuous question.
Yeah, I do.
We should
Go
take a
ahead.
break. Okay, let's announce our numbers once more so that our listener can join the ongoing conversation. The numbers to call if you want to talk about the new minimum wage is 0907 275 9950 or 0706 815 8029. And the approved new minimum wage for workers, the issues really. Now, Doc, going by the antecedents, do we also expect to have a higher and increased inflation? Etinyelu ndị ọrụ ego, onye na-ele ugiri etinyekwa ego, onye ọrụ ewelukwa ego akwụrụ ya jee fụ na ego na-egotebuli ogiri before adị egotezili ogiri again. Are we expecting something like that?
Of course. It's a natural demand and
So
supply.
nothing has been solved.
That is the issue. Because the reality on the ground is that as soon as the average market person learns that this money has actually begun to get to the pockets of workers, they will also increase their own prices of goods or services. Whether it's going to be marginal is a different matter. But the reality on the ground is that we're going to see higher costs of goods and services. So, and especially when the issue of fuel remains an albatross, remains a challenge.
Is that even legal to do so? Is it?
It's not about.
And there are policies that can stop that from happening. Why would the price of the market rise to meet the new minimum wage if the prices of goods and services are staying the same?
Remember that before now, I mean, in the 1990s, and then we had the price control board. But what did they really achieve? I mean, you can't legislate some of these things into formal practice because it's all about demand and supply. The average ogiri seller, to use Ngozi's balance, goes again to buy the seeds from which he manufactures the ogiri, and then the price of it goes up. How would you think that when he comes back and prepares the ogiri, he will sell it at the price he was selling it before the apparent inflation of goods and services? So these are the challenges, and it's a challenge, and sometimes some of these processes are not proper. And we just established now a task force on price control. We experienced it didn't work. I mean, it all went, and then people were just making money out of people. They catch you and say, hey, you increase the price. You can't legislate such things into policy frameworks. I don't know, but you may have your own thoughts about it.
So obviously, with the increase, nothing is really solved. And it doesn't matter how much the new minimum wage becomes, the issue is like a vicious cycle.
Absolutely.
We move round and round.
Absolutely.
And one would be forced to actually ask what should be done, really. We know that at the end of the negotiations, the organized level told us that they had to accept the 70,000 naira minimum wage as against the 250,000 naira they were proposing, because the president brought in some incentive, pledged some incentives, which includes the CNG, the fact that there will be upward review every 3 years. That's against 5 years that we used to know it. Do you think it's good enough reason to, to just get by with 70,000 naira?
The reality of the ground is that in labor, there's a limit to which you keep
Confined.
going forward and backwards. And so for me, I think it's wisdom on their part to have accepted, because to refuse to listen to the president, the government, would mean that there's going to be a level of high-handedness. And let me quickly also remind you that in 2014, when we had the national conference, there was this recommendation of the national conference in 2014 that the issues around wages should no longer be allowed to be in the exclusive list of legislative process. Let it be concurrent. Let states on their own, depending on their financial circumstances and contexts, now agree with workers that's serving under in their states on what they consider to be the minimum wage that will be. Because think about such states like Lagos that can afford to survive without a federal allocation. So such states can afford to even pay 100,000 naira. The same. Then some states that are really uncomfortable, as it were, because of their contexts, like states that up north that is being harangued by Boko Haram and all that, they may not really be able to pay this money. So let them also agree with their own people how much. So for me also, I will recommend that we need to have issues around these wages on the concurrent list. Let the states also have opportunity to negotiate with them, but agree on what they think they can pay.
In their various states.
In their various states.
Okay, because let's before I get back to what you just suggested, you know that currently we have the local government's absolute autonomy, and some local governments are more equal than the others. You cannot compare local government that has some parts of its communities in the semi-urban areas. You can compare them with those who are strictly rural. So now that it's obvious that local governments will be taking care of their transactions, making decisions for their various local governments, how do you see the local government churning out 70,000 naira minimum wage this season?
And essentially, I think it's even important for people, because sometimes I listen to people talk about this minimum wage, and they think that 70,000 naira, for instance, that is level 1, step 1. So if
and there's no level 1, step 1 anymore.
There's no such thing. So if the meaning is that if you now graduate it, level 2, level 3, level 4, what you are going to discover is that an average level 14 officer we know as level 14 maybe earning like 250,000 naira because of the 70,000. And sometimes I think about it and I say, how could some states really be able to pay this much? How can local government with the in quotes autonomy be able to pay all these things? So while I don't want to sound pessimistic, you are going to see a lot of agitation still going forward, because many local government areas and many states may not be able to pay this, even this 70,000. Because by the time you now do the graduation from level, we don't have level 1 again, but by the time you now do the graduation up to level 16, which is a director position, you discover that there are going to be a lot of challenges, most states. And that is why we're beginning to see the level at which some states are going with issues of IGR. Sometimes it's again begin to play back on the welfare of the average person in the states and in the entire country.
All Right, so now that the 70,000 naira minimum wage has been approved, it's expected that it's not just for the federal and state government workers, it's also expected that private sectors who employ more than 30 people pay this 70,000 naira. Now, the private sector are struggling, heavily struggling. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this 30 employees is because I know some girl who's working in a place that there are just 10 people would be expecting the madam to pay her 70,000 naira. This is not the case. This is you have to be up to at least 30 in your company to be able to talk about this. But I know some private schools, they have more than 30 teachers, and some of these teachers go home with 30 to 40,000 naira. You have to be a head teacher to have 70,000 naira. Now, if they are not able to pay this 70,000 naira, and they have to go through other means, such as increasing the fee of the students, don't you think it's like shooting ourselves in the leg once again?
You said it all. I mean, that's what it means. Sometimes I think about it and I say, well, because we are going to see massive unemployment if that becomes something that we want to implement.
Like
because,
down
like yes, there's going to be massive unemployment because some of these private schools and private establishments, medium and small scale industries that employ up to 30 persons. And they are now asking them to pay 70,000. And like I said, 70,000 is what people think that's this. You need to graduate it again, depending on the level at which particular officer is earning. So you end up discovering that people on level 5, level 6 will be earning up to 100 and something thousand naira. And well, I don't know, but I think that most establishments in this level you just mentioned may not be able to pay. So if you force them, what they might do, the only challenge or leeway they have is to reduce the number from that 30 to something that the law appreciates that you are not qualified, you don't need to be paid. So the meaning is that most people will now be retrenched. And you see, it's a vicious circle to use Ngozi's
the president in his presentation of the approval announced that that the federal government will find ways to assist the private sector and the subnationals to pay the minimum wage. Probably that could solve the local government issues, but the private organizations.
Well, the details are not very explicit for people. What will they do for them? I mean the private sectors and all that, organized private sectors. What are you going to do? Is that to give them grants, or is it to reduce the amount of electricity they use in running their business? So the details are yet clear to us. So, but I hope by the time they tell us exactly what they mean by supporting the organized private sector, we'll be able to make a comment on it.
All right. Doc, you've done stuff as regards people living in the rural areas to improve their living conditions. And with this increase, I mean, they are not rejoicing. Civil servants may be rejoicing, but certainly not people in rural areas. How can they cope?
That is this. For us in the civil society organization, like we already pointed out, my organization, Society for the Improvement of Rural People, since all these announcements, has been a challenge in terms of, what other policies of government go beyond just the civil servants and people who are working to the average Nigerian? And for me, the fulcrum revolves around the issue of transportation, the issue of fuel. During Jonathan's regime, we were paying 120 naira per litre. But what are we talking about now? In some fuel stations you go there, they will tell you 770. Some others will even pay 800. So how will the average person in the local communities cope with this development? So it's going to be a challenge. So that we are going to see a situation where rural poverty will be on a massive scale. And what does that engender? What is the agenda that's crime? Because these are young people. Somebody was giving us a testimony yesterday about a lawyer who was kidnapped along Enugu-Parakot Road. And you discover that these boys are speaking Igbo. So it's when we talk about Fulani and all that, the reality on the ground is that it is our people. But what is the driver for this? It's lack of what, lack poverty and lack of what to do. Because, and I don't mind the say it's the devil's workshop. When young people, after graduating from school, they have nothing to do, what would you expect them to do? I'm not by this justifying crime, but the reality on the ground is that unless and until we begin to deal with the issue, the drivers of some of these changes, that we may not, we may just be, I will say beating about the bush. But the reality is that when it doesn't appear we are achieving more. When you see your elected officers driving in exotic cars and with a lot of police security details and all that, and there you are, you who voted him into power, you can't even have access to talk to him anymore. So these are challenges. You know, a story was told of how Adolf Hitler was talking about the poor masses, and he said one day he brought a fowl and then plucked all the wings, all the feathers of that wing, and suddenly brought some corns and were dropping on the ground, and all the fowls that were whose feathers were plucked were following him. And so he said that that's how the poor masses, the bourgeoisie, treat the average. First they disempower you, and then once in a while they give you some pittance, and then you have no option than to begin to worship them and follow them wherever they go. Most of these challenges we are having is that people who were armed, young men who were armed with arms during the election period. And now that the election is over, the guns were not retrieved. So so we are now having a vicious cycle of crime and criminology up and down. And the challenge, I thank God thus far for what is happening in Enugu State, but the reality is that we still need to do more.
Especially in the rural areas. Okay, the numbers, if you want to join us in this ongoing conversation, are 0907 275 9950 or 0706 815 8029. The approved new minimum wage for Nigerian workers, the issues have formed the basis of our conversation this morning. We have a first caller. Good morning. Good morning. Please introduce yourself, sir.
My name is
Welcome. Welcome, barrister.
Yes, as you said, I can tell you that before 1979, when Shaka took over, there was no system of instruction. Those of us who went to school, and there was safe, there was safe, but there was now. Tell you that I can't weekly paid workers. Monday to Friday. Friday is an income. It never affected public servants. But now, one week has been translated for public servants, for professors, so I don't know whether they are taking over the treatment, but you don't hear about it or hear about the treatment. Now, when this minimum wage has been set for 7 years after time, of course, you start taking it across the board for people to say, oh, somebody who is now living in a smart, the public servant, the executive officer, or the smart background, or that. No. The problem we have in this country is that as soon as oil commodity for any money, government stops advertising about any money to buy it. If you go to the local government now, start talking about minimum wage, how it affects local government. What actually local government? You find that there is nobody employed in local government except teachers. If you remove teachers now. There's nobody.
No, that's
that
primary school teachers.
school teachers. Yes.
Primary school. Okay.
Primary school teachers. If you remove them from the local government council, they don't have any other chance. But if you go to the office, you find people are saying from the local government council, they don't take it. Some of them put the money to that. They go back to their market. And you're talking about local government. No. So we should go back to basics. Minimum wage is for artisans, people who are doing productivity job. Productivity, what you produce. Then when you produce by Friday, you are paid. And then there's the minimum for productive jobbers, 70,000 a month. Well, you translate it into the 2,000. And of course, you will see that you want it. Some people produce something for the and you have a minimum productive index for 2,000 something. Even if it's cutting grass for you or anything. So we are using
But
this,
Ferdinando, if we go by what you're saying, does it mean that because you said other than primary school teachers, local governments do not have regular workers? There are administrators in administration, there are those in accounts and clerical, those who perform clerical duties. So they should be pegged at one particular pay for a lifetime?
no, let me explain what I mean. If you go to any local government, how many people are in the office? What are they doing? I can't stop. Yes, how many people can stop there? They don't talk to that. Okay. But you now find that because they said primary school should be in the local government, now they now become a local staff. And then can you imagine this local government individual being in charge of the casting in the local government? And of course, they are not going to anyone with them 70,000 naira. That's what I'm talking about.
All right, thank you. Your points are noted. Good morning, sir.
You know.
All right, Dr. Chris Ubu, your parting words as we rise this morning.
My parting word is that please, this is now a national law. Well, as soon as the National Assembly passes it, now the president gives assent to it. It will become mandatory for every state to comply. My prayers is that let states, whatever it takes them, to be able to comply with this 70,000 naira minimum wage. It's going to be in the interest of the communities, particularly the workers that are salary earning. And the effect might also trickle down to the average Nigerian, because when people have ability to pay for some goods, then artisans and those who are doing other sundry mundane jobs will be able to benefit from it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chris Ubu, the Executive Director, Society for the Improvement of Rural People, former Head of Service in Enugu State. We appreciate your very resourceful contribution this morning on our show.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you are really technical and you're great facilitators. Keep up the good work you're doing.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
On Thursday, 18th of July 2024, the federal government and organized labor, it was announced to us actually that the federal government and the organized labor agreed to 70,000 naira as the new minimum wage against the 250,000 naira demanded by the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, and the Trade Union Congress, TUC. Since morning, we've been having conversations around this. We've had a discussion, and now we looked at some of the issues, especially those issues that are not actually being talked about now as a fallout to increased minimum wage. This conversation is not just ending this morning. We're expecting the organized labor to be here tomorrow to still talk to us about the new minimum wage. Get ready and join us then. My name is Ngozika Mba, signing out. Good morning, Coal City.